Hey guys, tonight we tiptoe through the velvet-curtained halls of a medieval manor where candlelight flickers on alabaster skin and a noblewoman sits by an open window. Never in it, of course, just close enough for the breeze. She's pale, not, I forgot, sunscreen pale, but the kind of pale that takes years of calculated avoidance, powdered concoctions, and frankly, an unhealthy relationship with sunlight. Her feet, daintily propped on a velvet pillow, barely peek out from under embroidered skirts, and they're so small you're starting to wonder if she's okay. This isn't just fashion, it's a form of social performance. In a world where your status is stitched into every hem, every shade of your complexion whispers something about your place in the grand feudal pyramid. Pale skin meant you didn't labor outdoors like the peasants. And those tiny, bound-up feet? They weren't made for work. They were made to be admired, preferably while you were seated, holding a chalice you definitely didn't pour for yourself. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Also, drop your location and local time in the comments. I love seeing where and when we're all drifting off together. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You find yourself in a land where beauty isn't skin deep. It's downright political. You're a young noble, freshly powdered and corseted, learning quickly that the most valuable currency isn't gold or land. It's how convincingly unbothered you can look, while slowly poisoning yourself with lead-based foundation. It starts with paleness, the kind that makes moonlight look like a sunburn. You sit indoors for hours, sometimes days, as your maid delicately applies white lead paste to your cheeks. The tingling? Oh, it's just the beginning. Historians still argue whether this mixture was deliberately harmful or just tragically uninformed. Though, to be fair, no one really had access to dermatology back then, or a working understanding of toxicity. Meanwhile, you're advised not to laugh too hard. It creases the powder. Smiling? Risky. Those lines around your eyes? Unforgivable. Your skin must remain smooth, expressionless, and ghostly. Anything else, and someone might think you have emotions, or worse, that you do things. A mainstream fact? Pale skin wasn't just aesthetic. It signaled noble birth, higher morality, supposedly, and virtue. The church even leaned into it, painting the Virgin Mary like she'd never seen a day of full sun. And here's your quirky tidbit for the night. Some beauty manuals suggested applying crushed pearls or powdered eggshells to the face. That's right. You're basically making meringue with your pores. A little vinegar, a little milk, a little hope. Your reflection in the polished metal mirror, glass mirrors were for the truly elite, stares back with a kind of eerie elegance, and you wonder, quietly, if this level of maintenance is sustainable. The answer, if you're curious, is no. But you won't know that until later, when your eyebrows fall out and your teeth begin to feel loose. Still, for now, you're the picture of high-born perfection, fragile, faint, and very, very pale. The sun is rising outside, lazy and golden, spilling over fields where peasants are already ankle-deep in dirt. You remain hidden beneath layers of linen, silk, and the heavy drapery of your bedchamber. A single ray of sunlight creeping across your cheek is a minor emergency, no less dire than a diplomatic scandal. You ring a bell. Curtains are drawn tighter. Disaster averted. See, in your world, a tan isn't a glow. It's a giveaway. A blot on your social resume. Tanned skin means labor. Means outdoor work. Means you might actually contribute to the economy. And that's simply not the vibe you're going for. Nobles prized their paleness because it was visual proof that they were above manual work. The lighter your skin, the further you were, literally and figuratively, from fields, stables, and that whole business of being useful. You were meant to be admired, adored, gently fanned by servants. Lifting a goblet? Acceptable. Lifting a basket of turnips? Barbaric. In fact, the word tan would have been more of an insult than a descriptor. If someone whispered that Lady Cecily was looking a bit warm, the gossip circuit would combust. Her social standing would melt faster than her forehead on a summer walk. Which, of course, she'd never take. You're reminded to carry your parasol if you dare step near the garden. Its ivory handle feels delicate in your glove-covered hand. Gloves being another layer of armor against the treachery of UV rays. You don't just avoid sunlight, you act like it owes you money. Historians still argue whether this obsession with paleness was more influenced by religious modesty or sheer class snobbery. Though let's be honest, it was probably both. Either way, the result was the same. A generation of people terrified of natural pigmentation. And here's your odd little trivia moment. Some nobles applied a paste made of white lead and vinegar that had to be carefully reapplied throughout the day, lest it begin to crack. Imagine walking around constantly checking your reflection, terrified your face might shatter like porcelain. One sneeze, and it's over. A medieval beauty nightmare. You apply your daily face coating while perched near an open hearth. Not for warmth, but for the soft lighting. Candlelight was forgiving. No harsh shadows. No revelations of the deepening bags beneath your eyes. Sleep is elusive when you've got 5 hours of grooming to do, and a face that can't touch a pillow. The castle halls murmur with footsteps of servants scurrying about. You hear the rustle of silk from Lady Eleanor down the corridor. She too will be ghostly today, perhaps even more ghostly than you, and that is unacceptable. You'll ask your maid for just a touch more powder, maybe an extra swipe under the chin. You'll tell yourself it's subtle. But between you and me, you're both starting to look like moon-faced goblins. Elegant ones, though, with excellent posture. Still, in this game of pale-skin politics, you either fade into elite invisibility or shine just a bit too brightly, like someone who's been outside. And that, darling, simply will not do. You sit still as a statue, because you have to. The maid is back with your cosmetics tray, and it's time to renew your face. She's holding a tiny pot of what looks like icing sugar. But oh no, it's something far more cursed. A concoction of vinegar, ceruse, and powdered white lead, lovingly nicknamed spirits of Saturn. Sounds magical. Is actually poison. The cold dab of the mixture on your cheek tingles at first, and then it burns, ever so slightly. But you don't flinch. That would smudge. The paste dries like chalk, giving your face that prized dead fish glow. Matte, white, flat. You're not trying to look healthy, you're trying to look expensive. Beauty manuals of the day. Yes, they existed. Recommended all sorts of alarming methods to achieve this ghostly look. One popular tip: sleep with slices of uncooked veal on your face. Because apparently, nothing says nobility like smelling like a butcher shop. Another favorite. Soak your face in a blend of wine and donkey milk to soften the skin. Donkey milk. There's a reason no one's bottling that as a luxury serum today. Of course, it's not just your face. Your neck, shoulders, even the tops of your hands all need to match. Nothing ruins the illusion faster than a perfectly pale countenance paired with sun-kissed wrists. It's like wearing white gloves with muddy boots. Scandalous. A mainstream fact to drift on. White lead makeup wasn't unique to medieval Europe. It had roots in ancient Rome and carried over well into the Renaissance. By the Middle Ages, it had become the ultimate beauty staple, despite the fact that it slowly poisoned everyone who wore it. There are written accounts of women developing bald patches, tooth decay, and chronic fatigue, all shrugged off as the price of elegance. Priorities. And here's your quirky tidbit. To seal in the whiteness, some women dabbed their faces with egg whites to create a tight, crackly mask. Imagine walking through court trying not to blink too hard, lest your whole expression flake off like old wallpaper. It was basically medieval Botox, just more poultry-based. Historians still argue whether these makeup techniques were widely practiced daily or just on special occasions, since not every woman could afford the time or ingredients. But among the nobility, especially in high courts, these rituals were status markers. They shouted, "I don't work. I have servants. I have time to slowly destroy myself in the name of a trend." And the worst part? You feel powerful. You see your reflection. Milky, smooth, impossibly still. And you believe, just for a moment, that you've become art. Delicate. Untouchable. Above. Even if your face itches, even if it's cracking by midday, even if you're a sneeze away from beauty collapse, your maid hands you a lavender-scented cloth to press gently, gently, against your face. It's soothing. For now. But oh, sweet dreamer, don't get too comfortable. You haven't even painted on your veins yet. You've made it through the face dusting and egg white shellac. Congratulations. But don't move. Not yet. The next layer of illusion awaits, with the patience of a saint and the eye of a cartographer. Your maid dips her fine-tipped brush into pale blue pigment and begins the most aristocratic art project you'll experience today. Painting veins. Yes, actual veins. Onto your skin in delicate, winding strokes. Just beneath your temples, along your neck. Sometimes down the cleavage, if it's a formal dinner and you're feeling flirty. Because what's paleness without proof? Anyone can slap on a bucket of white powder, but visible veins. Ah, now that says genuine noble. Blue as robin's eggs. The lines must appear just faint enough to suggest your skin is so translucent it barely exists. You don't merely avoid labor. You've practically transcended the physical realm. There you are, sitting perfectly still as this strange little ritual continues. It's quiet, save for the soft brushing, and you're barely there breathing. Honestly, it's kind of relaxing, until you remember you'll have to do this again tomorrow, and probably the next day. And if there's a royal visit, better start vein mapping your forearms too. Historians still argue whether this practice of drawing on veins was widespread, or more of a localized court trend, possibly popularized in French and Italian aristocracies. Some scholars think it was a short-lived fad. Others believe it was a standard part of the cosmetic repertoire. But whatever the case, it left quite the impression, especially on portraits of the time, where some noble women appear not just pale, but almost iridescent. And here's your quirky tidbit. One beauty tip recommended that ladies eat chalk and drink vinegar to thin the blood, which supposedly helped the veins stand out more visibly. Which, let's be honest, sounds less like a makeup hack and more like a slow, sad science experiment gone wrong. Now let's talk about the window. Your window. It's not for looking out, heavens no. It's for being seen. You sit near it. Never directly in the sunlight, of course, so others can pass by and gasp at how ethereal you look. Maybe you hold a lute you don't actually play, or a book you're not reading. The important thing is the posture, the drape of your gown, the gleam of that almost blue skin. It's a performance, really, a daily one. The noble life isn't about doing, it's about being, and nothing says, "I am above you," like looking vaguely unwell, but in a curated, pretty way. You're joined by a cousin who's also done up in porcelain and veins. You nod politely. Silently, you both assess who looks paler. It's not a competition, but it absolutely is. Your tiny dog sneezes somewhere in the corner. You flinch, hoping the vibration didn't cause a ripple in your egg white mask. It didn't, but barely of that. Another perfectly painted illusion. There's a quiet creak as your chair shifts beneath you. Carefully. Everything must be done carefully. You're wearing a face that isn't so much your own as it is temporary architecture. One sneeze from a passing servant, one gust of wind through the hall, and your whole aesthetic might come crashing down like a badly mortared tower. But now comes the part that's truly dazzling cheeks. Yes, even among all this alabaster, nobles couldn't resist a little pop of color. Just a touch, though. A whisper of blood. The illusion is not to look healthy, per se, but delicately alive. Like a flower that's somehow thriving in a crypt. A dab of crushed cochineal beetles or a smear of red ochre goes onto the cheekbones, applied with either the back of a hand or a small tuft of wool. The result? Candlelit blush. Not the flush of excitement, how vulgar, but the bloom of restrained nobility. The kind that says, I might be dying of something poetic. Of course, you don't forget the lips. Well, a little vermilion there, applied carefully, so the contrast against your powdered face doesn't scream clown, but rather whispers, kiss me if you dare, though I may faint here. Here's your historical anchor. Cosmetic use among medieval nobles, while controversial in some religious circles, was surprisingly widespread in courtly culture. Both women and men dabbled in it. Makeup was a tool of political flirtation, a display of wealth and access. It meant you had time, privacy, and servants. And when you walked into a hall glowing faintly under torchlight, you didn't just look like nobility. You looked like myth. Still, historians continue to debate the specifics, like whether most noble women did their makeup in private or publicly, like a morning ritual of social rankings. Some letters hint at gossip over beauty routines being as spicy as court scandals. Did you hear Lady Isabel let a servant touch her face? Gasps all around. Now for a delightful and slightly alarming, quirky tidbit. To make their eyes seem brighter, some women dripped a tincture of belladonna, yes, literal nightshade, into their eyes. It dilated the pupils and made them look wide, soft, dreamy. Also gave blurred vision and potential permanent damage. But beauty is pain, right? And let's not forget the eyebrows. Or rather, let's intentionally forget them. Because a smooth, high forehead was all the rage. So you might pluck your eyebrows entirely. Maybe even scrape your hairline back with a sharp blade, giving your face a stretched, otherworldly look. Less model, more mildly startled ghost. You stand now, or rather, you glide. Every movement is a study in restraint. You've added the color. The illusion is complete. From a distance, you're perfection. Up close, you smell faintly of vinegar, beetles, and whatever egg-white mask is quietly dying on your cheek. That's the price of being seen. You're almost ready to face the world, or at least the corridor leading to the solar, where polite conversation and passive-aggressive glances await. But there's one last thing to perfect before stepping out. Touch-ups. Because while your powdered face and beetle-blushed cheeks may look flawless, they are also one particularly humid afternoon away from disaster. So out comes the compact of the time. A tiny mirrored case filled with even more white lead paste, crumbling at the edges like stale icing. Your maid follows with a damp cloth and a bundle of rose petals. Not for fragrance, mind you, those are for blotting, because apparently the best way to manage your skin's oiliness is with flower corpses. You brace yourself as she dabs under your eyes with a cold linen square. One wrong press, and your eyeliner, which in this case is coal dust mixed with goose fat, could smudge halfway down your face. The goal isn't drama, it's death glow chic. Now here's your solid historical fact. Lead-based cosmetics were so pervasive in medieval beauty routines that their side effects became quietly accepted. Women who wore it long-term experienced skin ulcers, hair loss, and even neurological symptoms. It wasn't a surprise. It was practically part of the package. If you looked too healthy, people might start wondering if you were, say, working. And here's where it gets stranger. Some beauty guides suggested mixing mercury into the white lead for a smoother consistency. That's right, double poison, baby. 2 toxins for the price of 1. Mercury gave the mixture a pearlescent sheen, so your deathly pallor also shimmered slightly under torchlight. You were radioactive royalty. Historians still argue whether these toxic additions were common knowledge, or if the effects were just chalked up to mysterious, feminine ailments. We may never know whether Lady Marjorie knew her hair was falling out from her beauty paste, or if she just thought her scalp was under spiritual attack. Either way, she kept applying. Now your quirky tidbit for tonight. There's at least one recorded case of noblewomen using pigeon droppings and face masks to purify the skin. Yes. Bird poop. The logic? It supposedly dried out blemishes and soothed rashes. Imagine lying back with your eyes closed, a servant layering you in mild avian excrement, while harp music drifts through the hall. Back in the present moment, your face is powdered, painted, and primed. You haven't smiled for over an hour to avoid creating any disruptive folds. Your spine is straight, your lips are crimson, your eyebrows? Long gone. You step into the hallway, head held high, feeling like a freshly lacquered porcelain figurine. Around you, other nobles pass. Similarly pale, similarly delicate, similarly mildly poisoned. It's a club, really. You all nod politely, pretending you don't notice each other's flaking temples or the occasional patchy blush. The standards are high, the stakes are ridiculous, and yet you find yourself wondering if maybe tomorrow you'll try that mercury blend. Just a dab. For the glow, what could possibly go wrong? There's a hush as you enter the solar, that warm little chamber at the top of the manor, full of tapestries, gossip, and calculated languor. A monk sits in the corner, scratching away at a manuscript. His robe rustles faintly as he shifts, peering over the parchment like he's half listening. Which, of course, he is. Here, your complexion isn't just decoration, it's divine. Or so the church would have you believe. Pale skin, they say, reflects purity, innocence, godliness, like freshly fallen snow, or perhaps a blessed wax figure. Religious texts from the era are full of pale-faced saints, virgins, and angels. Yes. The closer you resemble them, the closer, supposedly, you are to God. It's not just fashion, it's virtue in powdered form. Your bone-white cheeks and downcast eyes practically scream piety, or they would, if screaming were ladylike. There's something quietly sinister in how it all ties together. Beauty, morality, and suffering, wrapped up in one fragile little package. Pale skin means you're not just noble, you're holy. And that's a hard standard to walk away from, especially when every stained glass window agrees with you. But here's a historical wrinkle for your pillow. The church itself was weirdly inconsistent about cosmetics. Some bishops denounced makeup as vanity, a slippery slope toward pride, lust, and dancing. Others turned a blind eye, especially if the woman in question was wealthy, devout, and generous with her tithes. Funny how that works. Historians still argue whether the clergy's selective silence was strategic, hypocritical, or just human. Either way, noble women continued painting themselves into piety, face first. And no one was about to call the queen's blush unholy. You join the other ladies of the court as they sit in a half circle, embroidering something probably symbolic. Birds, vines, or maybe a bleeding heart. You hold your needle daintily, but your mind wanders. You remember what your confessor said last week. Vanity must be resisted, but beauty reflects God's harmony. Right. So as long as your face reflects harmony and not lust, you're probably fine. Probably. And now, your delightful little tidbit. Some noble women carried around lockets containing scraps of saintly relics, bones, cloth, even toenails, believing the presence of these holy items would maintain their moral beauty, inside and out. Imagine pairing your lead-based blush with a mummified thumb bone and calling it a look. You suppress a laugh. Smiling makes your cheeks crease. And besides, the monk is glancing your way again. You wonder briefly if he's judging you, or if he's just impressed with how ghostly you look under the stained glass light. It really is your color. The sun filters through the window in long golden beams, touching everyone except you. You're in the corner, half shadowed. By design, too much light, and you risk revealing texture. Pores, wrinkles, proof of life. And that, my sweet noble sleeper, would be far too earthy. You're ethereal, holy, practically floating, and you didn't even need a halo. Just some lead, a prayer, and a little artistic deceit. The hall outside the solar echoes faintly with bootsteps, deeper voices now, slower, weightier. The noblemen have arrived, and with them, an entirely different flavor of pale ambition. Because yes, men join the ghostly glow-up too, just differently. You catch a glimpse of Sir Alaric as he strides past, his cheekbones just a bit too sculpted, his skin suspiciously smooth for a man supposedly overseeing cavalry. You raise an eyebrow. Well, the ghost of one, since yours are long gone, and smirk slightly. He's powdered, definitely powdered, but in a rugged, just rolled out of my prayer cell sort of way. See, while noble women went all in on ethereal pallor and sculpted frailty, noblemen walked a tightrope between masculine valor and holy glow. They didn't want to look too healthy, late hinted at labor, but they couldn't look delicate either. The result? A carefully curated appearance of soft strength, like a wax statue carved by someone really into stoicism, a mainstream truth to rest your head on. Male grooming in the medieval courts was more common than people like to admit. Wealthy men used powders, creams, and ointments to soften the skin and reduce shine. They plucked stray hairs, shaped their beards to ecclesiastical approval, and bathed in milk or floral-infused water before big events. Cleanliness wasn't just next to godliness, it was adjacent to flirtation. But unlike the women, men were supposed to look pale with purpose. They didn't draw on veins or paint their lips. No, that would be scandalous. Instead, they aimed for a kind of serene, sun-deprived authority, like they'd been reading in a chapel for 10 years straight and only emerged to judge your heresy. Historians still argue whether this male vanity was quietly encouraged or just publicly ignored. Some sources claim courts like those in Burgundy and Florence actively promoted male beauty as part of diplomatic poise. Others insist it was a guilty pleasure, one powdered forehead away from mockery. Either way, Sir Alaric is definitely not fooling anyone with his natural glow. And now for your quirky bedtime nugget. Some noblemen, particularly in Italy, used lemon juice and crushed snails as a skin tonic to lighten spots or cleanse the soul through the face, as one charmingly dramatic manual put it. Nothing like gastropods to fix your complexion and your mortal sins, all at once. Back in your chamber, you pass a polished metal mirror and glance at your reflection. Your lips are still red, your face still motionless, but you tilt your head, just a little, to admire the way the shadows fall. You remember your brother used to sneak into your powder when he was preparing for court visits. Said it helped him look scholarly. He also once fainted during a hunt, but you don't mention that. The boundaries are subtle, but they're there. Men can glow, just not too brightly. They can soften, just not collapse. And if they ever dare pluck their eyebrows, well, that's between them and God. Still, in a world where even battle-hardened dukes wear rosewater behind the ears, maybe beauty's grip runs deeper than anyone admits. There's a lull in the manor now, a sacred stretch of afternoon where everyone pretends they're resting, but really, they're preserving their faces. You sit motionless in the solar's corner, spine upright, feet curled delicately beneath you like some enchanted porcelain creature. Every muscle screams for release, but you dare not move. You're not just existing, you're suffering beautifully. Because in this world, beauty must hurt, and the more it hurts, the more it proves you deserve it. There's something strangely prestigious about enduring discomfort in silence. Your corset digs into your ribs with every breath, your skin itches under layers of lead paste, and your stomach growls quietly. Because who needs lunch when you're trying to maintain the hollow elegance of noblewoman chic, a fact to cradle in your pale little hands? Medieval noble society treated physical suffering as a sign of both discipline and status. Whether through fasting for religious devotion or binding yourself in the name of fashion, pain meant virtue. If it didn't ache, it probably didn't count. This is especially true for women. The tighter the laces, the smaller the appetite, the better. You were trained not just to look delicate, but to live as though your body was an inconvenient whisper, barely there, nearly saint-like, a floating presence that couldn't possibly be expected to do anything so crude as labor. Historians still argue whether this constant submission to discomfort was internalized piety or enforced performance. Was the noblewoman complicit in her self-sculpting, or was she the canvas? The line blurs, particularly when she's applying bee sting balm to make her lips swell just enough to seem kissably ill. And speaking of strange rituals, your quirky tidbit tonight involves a popular treatment for achieving that perfect pale yet glowing look. Leeches. Yes, leech therapy. Some women allowed the little wriggling vampires to attach to their faces, draining just enough blood to purify the complexion. Pale? Absolutely. Dignified? Debatable. You shift slightly and wince. The corset isn't letting up, and your lower back is starting to hum with a kind of numb defiance. But it's fine. It's all part of the look. You glance down at your hands, carefully positioned, knuckles up so they look smoother, and let them tremble just a little. Adds to the vibe. A maid walks in, carrying a tray of honey water and thin biscuits. You nod. Not to eat, of course, but to hold the cup gives you something to do with your hands, and sipping slowly distracts from the faint nausea. That's right. Lightheadedness is in this season. Your cousin stifles a yawn across the room. You watch as she subtly adjusts her skirts, trying to hide the way her foot cramps in her too small slipper. You give her a knowing look. She returns it. The unspoken sisterhood of silent pain. Because here, among the highborn, the goal isn't just to look good. It's to look like you're quietly surviving the unbearable, and doing it with grace. The afternoon stretches long and languid, like a cat in a sunbeam, though you, naturally, would never join it. Too much sun, too much alive. No. You remain perched in the shade, where every part of you, from the tilt of your neck to the stillness of your hands, is curated to send a single message. I do not work, and nowhere is that more obvious than your hands? Your hands, darling, are your resume, your public-facing brand, a living, breathing billboard for nobility. Because while faces may lie and corsets may deceive, hands, they betray the truth. Calloused palms whisper of chores. Sunspots speak of time in the garden. A crooked finger might suggest you once carried something unthinkable. Which is why your gloves are never just accessories. They're shields. Silk in the summer, fur-lined in the winter. Always worn when in doubt. You remove them with great ceremony at meals. Not because you need to, but because it's a tiny, elegant way of saying, "Behold my unblemished privilege," a historical fact to tuck beneath your pillow. Among the medieval elite, soft, white hands were so important that poems, portraits, and even marriage contracts praised them. One French nobleman was once described as having hands as fair as lilies, unmarred by toil. This was considered seductive. Forget biceps. Give them knuckles like custard. Of course, achieving such hand heaven took effort. You regularly soak them in rose water and honey. Your maid trims your nails to symmetrical perfection. At night, you wear thin linen wraps, soaked in almond oil and chamomile. Your fingers emerge each morning pink, plump, and smelling faintly of an apothecary's kitchen. Plus. But here's your deliciously weird tidbit. Some noblewomen went as far as bleaching their hands using a mixture of lye, vinegar, and powdered bone. It worked in the same way paint thinner works. The results were impressive if you could ignore the burning and the peeling and the small chance you'd never properly grip anything again. Historians still argue whether this intense hand maintenance was unique to women or if some noblemen partook in private. There are rumors, letters even, that suggest certain dukes had manicured handlers, servants whose sole job was to exfoliate their lord's palms, because apparently swordplay was fine. But cracked knuckles? Unforgivable. You glance at your own fingers now, resting lightly atop your embroidery hoop. The needle pricks silk, not skin, because of course, even your craft must be symbolic. You're stitching a lily, always lilies, or doves, or something else appropriately pure. A gust of wind brushes the curtain aside, and a beam of sun threatens to land on your hand. You flinch, ever so slightly, and adjust. The lighting must remain flattering, shadowed, soft, holy. Your sister enters with a new pair of gloves, ivory, embroidered, entirely impractical. You'll wear them at supper, not to protect your hands from food, but to protect your image from imperfection. Because if anyone saw a hangnail, they might assume you've been doing something, and that, my lovely listener, would be social death. You've spent the better part of the day being exquisitely still. Your hands, soft and luminous, are now tucked beneath your embroidered skirts as you rise slowly. Careful not to let your hem snag or your posture falter. You mustn't waver, not even slightly, especially when it comes to walking. Because now, it's time to address the feet. Your feet, dear listener, are not feet in the traditional sense. They are symbols, dainty declarations that say, "I have no need to run, or work, or walk more than 12 steps without a velvet-cushioned rest." The smaller, the narrower, the more delightfully useless your feet are, the more elevated your station. And so, years ago, perhaps even before you knew what discomfort really meant, your mother ordered your first pair of court slippers. Tiny, stiff, decorative, designed not for function but for form. There were no cobblers crafting orthopedic support for medieval ladies. No arch-loving inserts or cloud-like foam. Your shoes were made of brocade and a bit of sole, stitched more for aesthetics than practicality. The shoes barely fit then. They fit less now. And yet you wear them every day. Here's your historical fact to slip into. While Europe didn't adopt foot binding in the way some Eastern cultures did, the obsession with tiny feet still ran deep. Noble women wore deliberately small shoes to make their feet appear as delicate as possible. In some cases, girls were encouraged to wear undersized shoes from childhood to shape their feet into a more desirable silhouette. Think of it as passive-aggressive podiatry. Today, as you slip on your newest pair of blue velvet with silver threading, you feel the familiar pressure on your toes, the way the leather bites just slightly at your heel, and you smile. Because this, too, is status. If you can barely walk, that must mean you don't have to. Historians still debate how widespread this practice was. Some believe it was limited to courts and elite families, with enough servants to carry their daughters when walking became too painful. Others argue it was a more regional trend, fueled by fashion illustrations and court gossip rather than universal enforcement. Now your wonderfully odd tidbit. One medieval beauty manual recommended massaging feet with goose fat and wine to keep them supple and pale as parchment. The goose fat made sense. Sort of. The wine? Maybe just to numb the pain. Or maybe the feet just needed a little buzz to get through the day, too. You take your first steps. Slow and graceful. Like a swan trying to glide through soup. The slippers creak. Your toes protest. You've mastered a gait that avoids any sudden weight shifts. It's not quite a walk. It's more of a ceremonial float. Down the corridor, your cousin stumbles in her own pair, barely maintaining balance. She grabs your arm and mutters something about accidentally ordering a size too small. You don't say anything, but you both know the truth. Accidentally isn't real in noble footwear. Smaller is always better. So you'll hobble, you'll wobble, you'll smile through it all, pretending you don't notice the throbbing in your pinky toes. Because in a world where beauty is status, and status is everything, pain is just another accessory. The dining hall looms ahead, echoing with quiet chatter, clinks of goblets, and the rustle of brocade against carved oak benches. You brace yourself. Not for conversation, not even for the stew, but for the delicate journey across the stone floor in your absurdly undersized shoes. And as you walk, well, more like gently teeter, you realize something. Your shoes aren't just tiny, they're long, ridiculously long. Toes stretch out well beyond your actual feet, curving ever so slightly upward, like they're trying to defy gravity. They flap softly against the stones with each step, creating a rhythm you pray doesn't turn into a trip. Ah yes, poulain shoes. Here's your crisp medieval fact for tonight. By the late Middle Ages, particularly in 14th and 15th century Europe, fashionable nobles took a shine to poulain, elongated, pointed shoes that jutted several inches, sometimes a foot, past the real toes. The longer the point, the higher the status. Some lords even had to stuff the toes with moss or wool to keep them from collapsing, while others tied them to their knees with ribbons to avoid tripping over themselves. Nothing says elegance like shoelaces on your thighs. As you reach the dining hall's edge, you pause to adjust your balance. Your toes point straight ahead, but your center of gravity is off somewhere between "I'm gliding" and "I might fall into the soup." Still, you press forward. The clumsy choreography of noble footwear is a game you know well. And your odd tidbit for tonight? There were actual laws passed to limit the length of shoe points. Sumptuary laws designed to curb excess. In England, one decree declared that no man below a certain rank could wear points longer than 2 inches. Royalty, of course, were exempt, meaning a baron could strut in 6-inch poulains, but a knight had to settle for modest tips. Foot-based class warfare, if you will. Historians still argue whether these shoes were truly meant for walking or more for peacocking, especially since some nobles were known to wear them only at feasts, where walking was minimal and sitting was plenty. Think of it like today's red carpet stilettos, meant to be seen, not lived in. Back at the table, you slide into your chair with a subtle wince. Under the table, you wriggle your toes, though wriggle might be a generous word. You're fairly sure your left pinky toe is somewhere under duress, maybe lost, maybe bargaining with your metatarsals for relief. But you won't let it show. Instead, you cross your ankles just so, letting the tips of your poulains poke out from beneath your gown like twin sabers of style. A statement, a warning, a balancing act. Your cousin arrives moments later, her own shoes even more dramatic, curved tips nearly brushing the floor. You raise an eyebrow, silently judging. She raises hers in response, the unspoken war of fashionable footwear beginning anew. Because in the game of noble beauty, even your shoes must suffer, but they must suffer beautifully. Supper ends with a soft ring of silver bells, because of course it does. And you rise once again, your toes numb and your spine whispering rude things about your posture choices. But it's not over yet. The evening brings music, polite conversation, and, unfortunately, standing, which means it's time to make sure your entire body remains a vision of rigid grace. Enter the corset. Well, not the modern version with its curvaceous hourglass allure. No, this is the early medieval prototype. More of a kirtle, or sometimes a cote-hardie, with laces and stiffening panels, depending on your region and decade. Its job isn't to hug your curves, it's to force your torso into a straight, proud, elongated column. You're less voluptuous vixen, more slender birch tree, no swaying allowed. A mainstream fact to lace you in. By the 12th and 13th centuries, noble garments began evolving toward structured silhouettes. Bodices were tailored more tightly, with side lacing or back lacing, and the stiffening of fabric with buckram or whalebone was the beginning of what would later become the corset. The idea was to elongate the torso and compress the waist, not for comfort, but for elegance. Naturally, your maid tightens your gown's side laces slowly. With every tug, your ribs surrender a little more freedom. Your breath shortens slightly. You nod for her to continue. There's a sweet spot you're aiming for. Just tight enough that your waist appears narrow, your bust lifted, your stomach flat, but not so tight that you pass out during a harp solo. You glance in the mirror. Your silhouette is exquisite. Your organs? Slightly confused. But that's the game. Now your quirky little tidbit for tonight. Some noblewomen were advised to wear iron girdles beneath their dresses for added posture control. Not just metal boning and fabric, actual iron bands around the waist and hips. Heavy, rigid, and probably designed by someone who thought scoliosis was a sign of moral weakness. You'd clink when you walked. Nobility, but make it medieval armor cosplay. Historians still debate how common these girdles were. Some argue they were more symbolic or ceremonial than practical, while others believe certain devout women wore them for spiritual discipline and fashion reinforcement. Imagine trying to sit while being hugged by an iron barrel. Charming. But you make it work. You must. Your body is your advertisement. Upright, narrow, symmetrical. You shift from foot to foot. Well, more like redistribute your weight discreetly. Careful not to bend at the waist. Bending is not elegant. Bending is for people who pick things up themselves. Your cousin leans over to whisper something scandalous about Lady Beatrice's uneven hem. You smile without showing teeth. Your torso stays locked in place, like it's been signed over to the crown. Your back is straight. Your jaw, relaxed. Your soul, somewhere near your clavicle, quietly asking for a pillow. Still, you look divine, graceful, composed. Like someone who's never known the shame of a soft middle or a rounded shoulder. The corset may cramp your lungs, but it expands your status. And tomorrow, you'll wear it even tighter. Because slouching is for peasants. You glide, because walking is too plebeian at this point. Into the great hall, where music floats on candlelight, and the air hums with orchestrated nonchalance. The minstrels pluck their lutes gently. The courtiers murmur flatteries. And across the polished flagstones, nobles begin their evening promenade. It's time to mingle, to pose, to perform frailty with flair. But tonight, there's something new in the air. A trend, a shift, a limp. Yes, a limp. You watch as Lady Cecily, ever fashion-forward and never one to miss a moment, sachets into the room with a gait that's off. A subtle hitch. A delicate delay on her left side. Not quite an injury. Not quite performance art. But somewhere in between. And here it is, the latest affectation among the upper crusts, the stylized, deliberate limp. Why? Because walking gracefully is old news. The new ideal is fragility so profound it disrupts mobility. After all, if you're too delicate to walk steadily, clearly you've ascended into the highest circles of suffering as status. A real historical whisper to note. While there isn't concrete evidence that noble women faked limps as fashion, there are records of people mimicking the sickly elegance associated with tuberculosis and other ailments. Pale skin, thin frames, slow movements, all blended into an aesthetic of frail beauty. Some scholars believe certain walking styles, mincing steps, pigeon-toed poses, and yes, even affected limps, were used to exaggerate delicacy, like runway walks, but with fewer sequins and more gout. And oh, your delicious tidbit for tonight. In some French courts, there was a trend where noblewomen wore decorative leg braces, not for support, but to suggest they required support. Imagine strapping on a tiny, bejeweled knee brace just to imply you might collapse from the sheer weight of your own refinement. It was the medieval version of posting a thirst trap and captioning it, "Feeling fragile." Historians still argue whether these braces were purely aesthetic or actually served a mild orthopedic function. Either way, they became status items. If your legs couldn't hold you up unaided, congratulations. You were probably winning at noble life. Back in the hall, you shift your weight ever so slightly and test it. One step forward. A gentle sway. A calculated hesitation. Does it look intentional? You repeat it. Slower this time. Yes, that's the one. Your cousin notices. She nods approvingly. You pass Lord Henry, who offers a bow so deep it looks like he might dislocate something. You respond with the slightest curtsy. Any deeper, and your iron-girdled waist might snap like a twig. The dance begins. Couples take their places. The music swells, but this isn't a vigorous country jig. It's a slow, swaying promenade, where every movement is an opportunity to showcase how not built for action you are. You trail your fingers along the velvet-backed bench. You sigh, faintly. The limp is working. You are delicate, frail, practically a breath in a gown. And as the night drifts on, you wonder idly, if beauty is pain, then are you officially gorgeous yet? The feast is winding down, the air thick with the scent of rosemary, beeswax, and the faint despair of overcooked venison. You excuse yourself from the conversation, something about a scandalously visible ankle at court last month, and retreat to the quieter alcove where ladies go to freshen up, which mostly means sit down and breathe. It's here, in the candlelit stillness, that a maid appears bearing a small silver box. You know what this means. It's time to reapply. But not paint. No, not powder. Perfume. Ah, yes. The invisible veil. The final layer of artifice. Because while you've done your best to look celestial, you must also smell like heaven. And that's no easy task in a world where bathing is an event, not a habit. A soothing little fact for tonight's dreams. While full-body bathing was viewed with suspicion in some corners of medieval Europe, too indulgent, too sensual, too wet, nobles still valued scent, perfumed oils, scented gloves, aromatic sachets in your bodice or skirts, all meant to mask the daily bouquet of sweat, wool, and whatever was being cooked in the hall that day. A sweet-smelling noble was a refined noble, even if the last time you touched water was unclear. Your maid opens the silver box to reveal a pomander, an orb filled with pressed herbs, spices, and dried flowers. She dabs your wrists with a cinnamon oil, then tucks a sprig of lavender into your sleeve. For extra flair, she adds a drop of orange blossoming essence behind each ear. It tingles, cool and clean. You feel instantly safer, less human. But here's your quirky bedtime spritz. Some nobles went all in on fragrance. So much so that a few kept live herbs tucked under their wigs or hats. Rosemary for memory, basil to ward off bad spirits, and sometimes even sprigs of thyme believed to repel lice. You're essentially wearing a salad on your scalp. But hey, at least you're refreshing. Historians still argue whether the use of perfume was purely cosmetic or if it held medical weight. The popular belief was that good smells drove out bad airs, which were thought to cause disease. So if you reeked of cloves and rose petals, you were probably saving your soul and your lungs. Win-win. You inhale deeply, enjoying the soft bouquet wafting from your gloves. They've been pre-scented with violet oil, a little luxury whispered about at court, since only the wealthiest can afford perfumed gloves imported from Italy. You drift back toward the hall just in time to catch the tail end of a lute performance. As the music winds down, a gentleman passes close. He pauses, sniffing slightly, and gives you a nod. Approval. Maybe even admiration. You don't smile. That would be too much, but you let your gaze linger just a second longer than politeness requires. Because while your powdered face and wine-fed feet may draw the eye, it's your scent, your silent, sacred aura that seals the illusion. You smell like wealth, like leisure, like someone who definitely didn't chop garlic today. And that, darling, is what nobility should always smell like. Later, when the music dies down and the hall is hushed by fatigue and overfull stomachs, you make your way to your chamber. Your slippers have fused to your feet like little velvet prisons. Your corset whispers cruel lullabies. And your skin, well, your skin is begging for mercy, which means it's time for your nightly skincare ritual. Yes, even in a world of lead paste and beetle blush, there's a regimen. You don't just become an alabaster dream, you maintain it with the slow, rhythmic agony of pre-modern beauty treatments that smell vaguely like soup. You sit by the hearth, and your maid brings in a small basin of warm water steeped with chamomile. First, the cleansing. With a cloth dampened just enough to avoid soaking your wig, she wipes away the day's layers. The rouge, the powder, the egg whites, the crushed pearls. The faint scent of ash and rose petals wafts through the air as your face returns, inch by inch, to its bare form. Surprisingly normal. Slightly red. A little tired. Human. A mainstream medieval truth. skincare was indeed a thing. Nobles used a variety of natural ingredients, milk, honey, herbs, clay, to clean and soften the skins. Not for vanity alone, but because healthy skin was considered a reflection of inner purity, and also because looking like you didn't spend the day herding sheep was very much the goal. Your maid next brings a small jar of clay mixed with rosewater and vinegar. It smells earthy, tart, a bit like sadness and hope blended into mud. She pats it across your face with practiced fingers, forming a thin, tightening mask. You're to sit still until it dries, which isn't difficult when you've spent most of your waking hours pretending to be a porcelain sculpture anyway. Now for your quirky tidbit. In certain parts of Europe, women added crocodile dung to their beauty masks. Yes, actual crocodile excrement, dried, powdered, and mixed with oils. It was believed to exfoliate and draw out impurities. There's no record of whether it worked, but we can all agree it was a bold choice. Historians still argue whether such fringe treatments were widespread or exaggerated by observers for dramatic effect. Some believe these odd ingredients were used sparingly or only by the truly beauty-obsessed. Others suggest they were part of a thriving medieval spa culture, hidden behind castle walls and guarded by fiercely loyal maids. The clay tightens, pulling your skin taut as a tapestry. You sit with it, quietly, letting the crackling fire mimic your own slow crumble. Your hands are soaking in a bowl of almond milk and sugar water. Your feet, freed at last, are slathered in a mashed herb poultice and wrapped in linen. You look like a marzipan mummy. But this is your moment. Your secret sanctum, the part of noble life no troubadour sings about. Sitting half naked, covered in swamp paste, praying you don't get a visitor. Still, tomorrow, when you rise, you'll glow, not from health, but from having tried. Because effort, especially invisible effort, is the truest mark of medieval beauty. The fire's embers pulse quietly, casting flickers of gold against your now clay-crusted face. You don't speak. You barely blink. Your maid fans you slowly with a pheasant feather fan, not for temperature, but to help dry the layers of potions currently working, or waging war, on your skin. And then, the most sacred part of your ritual arrives, the milk bath. Now, this isn't some quick splash in a copper tub. This is an event. 2 servants enter, hauling in buckets of lukewarm goat milk mixed with honey, crushed lavender, and a suspicious amount of sourness. Fresh milk? Not always an option. Spoiled milk? Oddly preferred. Because somewhere between the curds and the chemical stench lies your best shot at alabaster skin. You ease into the bath with the grace of someone who's definitely pretending this isn't disgusting. The milk is thick, slick, slightly chunky. The heat is comforting, but the smell is what you might generously call cheese-like. Still, this is the price of glory. Cleopatra bathed in milk. Surely you can too. Here's your historical fact to swirl around in. Medieval nobles genuinely believed in the softening, whitening effects of milk baths. Especially goats' or asses' milk. Some added ground almond meal or rose petals for a pleasant texture. And honey was considered both antibacterial and luxuriously decadent. Bathing, when it happened, was more therapeutic than hygienic. You weren't trying to be clean so much as beautifully preserved. And your offbeat tidbit? Some nobles bathed in wine instead. Yes, actual wine, believing the acidity would slough off old skin and stimulate new glow. Did it work? Possibly. Did it attract every fly within a 10-mile radius? Also possibly. Historians still debate how often milk baths were truly taken. Was it a common self-care moment? or a luxury reserved for court occasions and bridal prep? Some scholars suggest they were exaggerated by poets and travelers who liked their noble ladies a little extra mythical. Others point to records of entire estates allocating weekly milk stores to the lady's tub. That's devotion. And lactose. Back in your tub, you reach for a soft linen cloth soaked in rose oil and begin to gently dab your shoulders. The milk clings to your skin, coating you in a glimmering, sour-scented sheen. It's not relaxing, but it feels important. You imagine your future suitors marveling at your velvety arms and pale décolletage, never knowing it came courtesy of expired breakfast. The bathwater cools slowly. Your maid gently pours a final jug of warm mint infusion down your back, a kind of fragrant farewell. Then she wraps you in layers of linen and wool, the texture soft against your scrubbed skin. You step from the bath glistening faintly, skin as pale as parchment and just as delicate. Beneath the surface, the milk has worked its alchemy. You may smell like a dairy cart, but by morning, you'll look like moonlight bottled. And truly, that's the only kind of spoiled that matters here. The chill from the stone floor snakes up your legs as you shuffle back to the dressing stool, wrapped like a confection in soft linen and milk-soaked skin. Your reflection greets you again. Not in a glass mirror, those are rare and wildly expensive, but in a polished brass plate held up by your maid. It's warped slightly, the edges bruising your face into something vaguely amphibian. But flattering? Always. Because mirrors in your world don't necessarily reflect truth, they reflect intention. That warped brass doesn't show pores or dark circles. It softens lines, blurs imperfections. It lets you believe the rituals worked, that you're glowing, that your cheekbones are marble carved, that your skin is pale not from the lead but from lineage. The distortion flatters you, and you accept the lie with gratitude. A soothing historical truth. Glass mirrors were indeed rare luxuries in medieval Europe. Most people, yes, even nobles, used polished metal, water bowls, or even the sheen of obsidian stone. These mirrors gave a hazy, softened image, which, let's be honest, was probably a mercy considering all the goat milk and lead paste involved. But your chamber isn't just full of half-truths and candlelight. There's also something else. Illuminated manuscripts, books, painstakingly painted with gold leaf and tiny, ornate illustrations. One lies open beside your mirror, its pages glowing in the firelight. It depicts noblewomen, like you, draped in clouds of linen, skin like moon milk, feet so dainty they barely exist. You study them not to read, but to compare. Are your lips shaped the same? Is your forehead high enough? This is your Instagram scroll. Now for your curious crumb of trivia. Some manuscripts depicted ideal women with comically exaggerated features. Elongated necks, heads the shape of pears, eyes like almonds floating in moonlight. Scholars believe these weren't realistic portraits, but aspirational ones. Artistic filters, if you will. Beauty standards not just recorded but invented, one brushstroke at a time. Historians still argue whether these idealized manuscript depictions influenced real-life behavior or merely reflected it. Did women start shaping themselves after the art? Or did artists embellish the already fashionable traits of their patrons? It's the medieval version of chicken or egg, or maybe chalk or cheekbone. Your maid adjusts the candlelight so it catches your cheek just right in the brass plate. You tilt your head, your skin glows, your neck looks long, your lips, just retinted with a dab of elderberry juice, are full and symmetrical. The illusion is working. She slips away quietly, leaving you with your reflection and your thoughts. And beneath it all, that tug of comparison. Are you pale enough? Are your feet small enough? Have you performed beauty well enough to be noticed, but not envied? You glance again at the manuscript, at the lady painted mid-curtsy, with her spine impossibly straight and her gown sweeping like a swan. You copy the pose, just briefly. You breathe in, stand taller, and freeze like a page illustration come to life. This isn't just a face. This isn't just a body. It's a role, an image, projected, protected, and painfully maintained. And if the mirror doesn't show the cracks, then maybe they aren't really there. You're seated now in your chamber's quietest corner, enveloped by the softest cushions the manor can afford, stuffed with goose feathers, embroidered with lilies, and scented with a hint of lavender that someone in the kitchen definitely mistook for a garnish earlier today. You're calm, serene, composed, and also thinking very hard about marriage, because no matter how delicate your footfall or how snow-pale your collarbone, none of it matters unless it leads to one very specific goal: a strategic, upwardly mobile union. Beauty, you see, is more than admiration. It's currency, a mainstream truth. For noble families, daughters weren't simply married, they were traded. Their appearance, health, fertility, and comportment were leveraged in political alliances, land exchanges, or peace treaties. Being beautiful wasn't vanity. It was diplomacy. Your face could close a deal that 10 squires with swords never could. And the standards were brutal. Your skin had to be flawless. Your hips wide enough to suggest fertile, but narrow enough to scream aristocratic. Your laugh had to be gentle. Your steps smaller than a prayer, and your conversation limited to embroidery, saints, and weather so vague it couldn't possibly cause offense. But here's the real clincher. If your appearance wasn't good enough, your dowry had to work overtime. More sheep, more land, more silver chalices. And imagine that your cheekbones are directly linked to your father's financial stress. Sharp little tidbit for tonight's collection. Some noblewomen reportedly painted tiny dots of red on their chests to simulate a delicate flush, proof of youthful vitality and good circulation, just in case their natural coloring was a bit too peasant adjacent. Was the medieval version of contouring your cleavage, minus the ring light. Historians still argue whether these enhancements were widely understood as artifice, or if suitors genuinely believed in the rosy illusion. Were they fooled, or was everyone just politely pretending? Because the social game required mutual suspension of disbelief. Your maid re-enters with a new hair ribbon, pale green silk imported from Venice. A gift from your aunt, who swears it matches your eyes better than the old ivory one. You nod and let her braid it into your hair, which has been lightly scented with violet oil and dusted with powdered rice to keep it matted and elegant. Every detail, every fragrance, every invisible tweak is part of the presentation. You imagine tomorrow's gathering at court. The slow procession, the watching eyes, the whispers behind gloved hands. Is that Lady Evangeline's daughter? Look at her neck like swan's breath. I heard she doesn't even eat meat, just petals and hope. You press your hands together. Soft, white, veinless, perfect. You've done the work. Your body is a message, polished and packaged to say, I will bear children. I will uphold legacy. I will never embarrass you by sweating. The candle flickers. You breathe. You look again at the mirror. Still pale. Still perfect. Still valuable. Morning breaks. Not with birdsong, those are for peasants, but with the low drone of bells from the chapel, and the soft patter of servants preparing breakfast you will only nibble at. You're already awake, propped delicately against a bolster, waiting to hear which rumors survived the night. Because beauty might be currency, but court gossip, that's the stock exchange. Your maid enters, eyes wide with news. She tries to maintain the appropriate hush, but you can tell by her hurried curtsy and barely concealed smirk. Something scandalous has bloomed overnight. Ah, Lady Mathilde, it seems, has been spotted without her veil. In the daylight. On the terrace. The horror, a solid historical footnote. In many medieval courts, especially among the nobility, women's public presentation was highly orchestrated. Showing your hair, your hands, or your full face without powder or veil was a social risk. These weren't just modesty customs, they were part of a finely tuned image machine. A lady out of uniform was a lady out of control. Lady Mathilde's sunny misstep will ripple through every embroidery circle today. The whispers will start gentle, concern for her complexion surely, and escalate by afternoon into full-blown conspiracies. She's trying to appear earthy, maybe she wants to marry down. She's clearly having a spiritual crisis, and here's your quirky tidbit to snuggle up with. Some noblewomen were so paranoid about maintaining their powdered perfection that they traveled with small screens, wooden or lace, held in front of their faces when walking between rooms, lest they be exposed to sudden sunlight or the wrong kind of candlelight. Essentially, medieval ring lights, just carried by someone else. Historians still debate whether the social policing of these beauty standards was stricter between women, or enforced from above by patriarchal expectation. The records show both, lords praising wives for being like moonlight, and ladies-in-waiting destroying reputations one powdered eyelash at a time. Either way, the message was clear: flawless or forgotten. As you take your morning tea, just a little honey, no cream, calories are conspicuous. Your cousin enters, her face flushed from a brisk walk, and possibly vengeance. "Have you heard?" she whispers, eyes glinting. Lady Mathilde's forehead shone. You both nod, mournfully. How tragic, how illuminating. Literally. And yet, under that thin veil of sympathy, a tingle of satisfaction hums. It's not that you wish her ill. It's just a relief to know someone else cracked under the pressure, that someone else slipped. Just long enough for you to shine brighter by comparison. You spend the next hour perfecting your veil position, just in case. Not too low mysterious. Not mourning. Not too high accessible, but never available. You reapply a whisper of powder to your nose, freshly blanched, freshly saint-like, because the truth is, in courtly circles, beauty isn't just about looking lovely. It's a battle of impressions, and every eyelash out of place is an opening for attack. Lady Mathilde forgot that. But you, wrapped in silk, shaded and serene, you will never forget. The afternoon sun is filtering through the stained glass windows now, bathing the great hall in fractured light. Ruby, emerald, gold, like God accidentally dropped a jewelry box on the floor. You're seated near the back, of course. Not too forward, not too eager, but visible. Always visible. And then, across the room, you see her. A peasant girl, well, former peasant girl. Now dressed in a hand-me-down gown that was probably last fashionable 2 reigns ago. Her hair plaited with cheap ribbon, but her cheeks are powdered. And her skin, you note with no small amount of alarm, is quite pale. She's trying very hard. You don't know who she is exactly. A new lady in waiting? Someone's cousin? A merchant's daughter attempting to climb a few rungs of the social ladder? But here's the thing about beauty in your world. It's not just about appearance. It's about lineage. Trying to look noble when you're not noble? That's more than rude. It's threatening. A well-grounded historical truth. Sumptuary laws in medieval Europe were designed to prevent exactly this. These were rules enforced by the crown that dictated who could wear what. Fabrics, colors, even certain styles were restricted by class. A silk trim or fur cuff on the wrong person could cause a scandal. In some places, wearing purple if you weren't royal could earn you a fine. Or worse, and your quirky crumb for today's dramatic buffet. In parts of 14th century England, there were specific bans on artificial whitening of the face for lower-class women. The fear? That they'd use cosmetics to pass as higher rank, lure noble husbands, and heaven forbid, blur the social order. Foundation as felony. Who knew? Historians still argue whether these laws were actually enforced or mostly symbolic. Some records show punishments and court cases. Others suggest the laws were more about social messaging. Public warnings dressed up as legal codes. Either way, they highlight just how dangerous it was to blur the line between born and beautiful and made up and ambitious. Back in the hall, you watch her shuffle nervously. Her shoes are too new. Her hands too rough. The powder on her face is uneven, cracked at the jawline. She's done her research, but not her blending. The other ladies notice. You can tell by the ripple of glances, the half-turned shoulders, the smile that doesn't quite reach the eyes, the quiet but deliberate exile of someone who dared to imitate without invitation. You sip your rosewater. You don't speak. But your silence is fluent in disapproval. And yet, somewhere deep inside, beneath the layers of powder, posture, and pearl-pinned pride, you feel a flicker of something. Not sympathy exactly, but recognition. You were taught to be this way. Trained, polished. She's just trying to skip the suffering. But suffering is what earns you the look. You tuck a strand of hair behind your ear, veil falling gently back into place. You remind yourself that beauty here is not democratic. It is inherited, maintained, and guarded. And those who fake it? Well, they usually don't last long. Night has fallen again, and with it, a thick velvet hush settles over the manor. Somewhere, a lone harp sighs through the air, and distant hooves echo over damp stone. But in the east wing, a candle burns late in Lady Eleanor's chamber, and the scent trailing under the door is metallic. Sharp. A little too familiar. You hear the whisper before the words. She's fading. Beautifully, though. A rumor floats down the hall. Lady Eleanor, pale as winter's breath, elegant beyond reproach, is unwell. Again. Only this time, it's serious. You adjust your shawl, draw it tighter. Not in fear, exactly, but in acknowledgement. Because in your world, there's a fine, terrifying line between the pursuit of beauty and the slow dance with death. And sometimes, they hold hands. A historical reality. The prolonged use of toxic cosmetics, lead, mercury, arsenic, eventually led to the deterioration of the very faces they were meant to perfect. Skin peeled, hair thinned, teeth loosened and fell, organs gave up. Some noble women, especially those most committed to the ideal, became sick in ways no doctor could treat. They wasted away, while still looking hauntingly beautiful. Which brings us to your eerie tidbit tonight. In certain circles, a death from cosmetic poisoning wasn't merely tragic. It was romanticized. A kind of beauty martyrdom. Imagine coughing into lace, while still powdered and veined, admired, even as you vanish. Some poets describe these women as plucked too soon by God, as if their paleness had simply floated them off into heaven like a silken balloon. Historians still argue whether this glamorization was widespread or confined to literary circles, where aesthetic death was just another metaphor for untouchable femininity. Either way, it paints a grim picture. The more effort you put into becoming ethereal, the more you risked becoming extinguished. You remember Lady Eleanor at last week's feast? She hadn't eaten, only sipped wine from a silver cup. Her face was flawless. Too flawless. Her eyelids barely moved. Her voice was a hush. Some said she wore a new kind of powder, imported from Florence, laced with pearl dust and something secret. Something that made the veins glow more vividly. Something that didn't wash off easily. Tonight, her maid says she's in bed, too weak to rise. Her gowns have been draped across a chair like she's still inside them. And in the hall, someone is already whispering about what she'll wear if she doesn't recover. And yet no one sounds shocked. Sad, yes, but not surprised. Because this was always a possibility. The dangerous edge of noble beauty. You stand at your window, the moon lighting your profile just so. Your own powders are locked away, but you remember their burn. You remember the night your lips bled from too much crushed cochineal. You remember smiling through it anyway, because in this world, fading isn't failure. Not if you fade with grace. The next morning dawns with all the heaviness of a sermon. The air feels slower, quieter. Even the servants tread more softly, as if the manor itself is holding its breath. Word spreads quickly, in the way these things always do. Lady Eleanor is gone. Not violently, not suddenly, just gone. Like parchment catching fire from the corner inward. Slow, elegant, inevitable. She slipped away sometime in the early hours, veiled and unmoving, her cheeks still touched with faint rouge. Rumor says the veil wasn't removed, even in death, as if peeling it away might undo the perfection. There's no hysteria, no screams, just that cold, practiced silence the nobility reserves for moments when emotion would be inelegant. You sit in the chapel now, spine stiff, heart a little too aware of its own rhythm. The stained glass turns your skin pink and blue in shifting patterns, and your hands are folded just right on your lap, even though they tremble slightly. You're not crying, that would smudge your powder. But you're remembering a historical truth to echo in the silence. In portraits and tomb effigies, noble women were often depicted at their most beautiful. Not necessarily how they looked at the end, but how they were imagined in their ideal form. Smooth brows, soft eyes, skin pale as carved marble. Death didn't erase beauty. It froze it, preserved it like pressed flowers between 2 pages of illuminated parchment. And now, your curious little detail. Some noble families paid artists to touch up post-mortem portraits, exaggerating the subject's paleness and grace. In a few especially unsettling cases, artists were even instructed to correct facial features so the deceased would appear more fashionable in death than they ever did in life. One painter reportedly painted open eyes over closed lids so the dead woman appeared serenely alert, ready for court. Historians still debate whether these artistic liberties were forms of reverence, propaganda, or quiet denial. But what's undeniable is that beauty, even in its most final moment, remained a performance. You glance up toward the altar, where a tapestry of the Virgin Mary hovers over the candles, her face as white as bone, her hands folded just like yours, and suddenly you realize this is the goal. To be remembered not as you were, but as the sum total of your best days, your most delicate features, your most convincing illusion. After the service, you walk with the others into the courtyard. Conversation is hushed but already shifting. Someone comments on how peaceful Eleanor looked. Another mentions the silk of her shroud. You nod along, lips forming words you've said before, and will say again. She was radiant. And maybe that's the part that clings. That even in death, Her beauty had the final word. It's a strange sort of triumph. A quiet, powdered victory. You run a gloved hand along your jaw, suddenly aware of the weight of your own appearance. You survived another day. And you're still beautiful, but now, you wonder for how long. You return to your chamber in silence, trailing the soft hush of morning behind you like an embroidered veil. The candlelight flickers more gently tonight, as if reluctant to cast shadows. You let yourself sink into your dressing chair, muscles aching, not just from the corset, not just from the shoes, but from the tension of knowing that every blink is being watched, judged, measured. And now, more than ever, it's impossible to ignore that you're not just imitating beauty. You're imitating sickness. Pale skin, hollow cheeks, glassy eyes, all markers of elegance, and yet also the telltale signs of consumption, of anemia, of every ailment that makes the body fail, but the face blossom. And for reasons no one likes to admit, that frailty has become the standard. A well-documented historical fact. In late medieval and early Renaissance Europe, diseases like tuberculosis, then called phthisis, or the wasting disease, became unintentionally glamorized. The pale complexion, the weight loss, the slow, dreamy speech, these all became associated with romantic idealism. Poets praised women who seemed touched by illness, as if divine delicacy had graced them. So if you looked a little too healthy, that was a problem. A strong pulse and ruddy skin might suggest you worked, or sweated, or worse, ate bread with the crust. Your maid enters quietly, setting a tray of rose-hip tea beside you. You sip it slowly, tilting the cup just enough to avoid cracking the layer of gloss on your lips. She asks softly if you want anything else. You shake your head. You're not hungry. You rarely are. That's part of the performance, too. Tonight's strange but true tidbit. Some women went so far as to induce symptoms of illness to meet the aesthetic. They deliberately restrict food, wrap themselves in cold cloths, or use belladonna to dilate their pupils and give that wide, glassy look. There are reports, questionable but persistent, of noble women pricking their skin lightly to simulate signs of bloodletting. Faux fragility was fashion. Fainting was almost flirtation. Historians still debate whether these behaviors were widespread or limited to the most elite, image-obsessed courts. But they agree on one thing. The association between sickness and beauty wasn't just symbolic. It was aspirational. The frail body was idealized, sanctified, even eroticized. You think of Lady Eleanor again, her thin silhouette, her quiet cough, the way people watched her without blinking. Even as she faded, she drew eyes. That kind of admiration doesn't die. It lingers, the way perfume clings to a handkerchief long after the hand has gone cold. You stand, slowly, your reflection waits. Still pale, still composed. You tug your sleeves down over your wrists, hiding the slight bruise where your corset was a little too tight this morning. You'll have to loosen it tomorrow. But not too much. You wouldn't want anyone thinking you've gained strength. You cross to the window. Outside, the moon is a slice of cream against the black sky. Beautiful. Remote. A little sickly. Just like you. The moon still hangs above the manor's silhouette like a watchful eye, pale and distant. You press your fingers to the cold glass of the window pane, not for comfort but for calibration. Is your skin colder? Good. That's on trend. A little more lifeless tonight? Even better. Because now, of course, it's time to check the calendar. Not the one that tells you the date, but the cycle. The moons. Yours. The rhythm of tides, blood, and beauty standards that shift in tandem with something older than fashion. Mythology. A soft truth. passed through whispers and old herbal books. Many noblewomen, especially those with an eye toward natural beauty, believed that their best aesthetic practices had to align with the lunar cycle. You didn't just apply a mask when you felt like it. You timed it with the waxing crescent. You didn't trim your hair at random. You waited for a full moon because everyone knows that's when growth is strongest. Or at least, more romantic. Tonight is a waning moon, which means it's a time for purging, cleansing the skin, the spirit, the stomach if need be. Your maid brings a bowl of bitter herbs soaked in vinegar, which you sip like someone being punished politely. There's mugwort, thyme, maybe a bit of sage. You pretend it's soothing. It's mostly terrible. And your curious lunar tidbit? Some women swore by moonstone powder. Yes, the semi-precious gemstone, crushed and mixed into balms to absorb moonlight and give their skin a subtle luminescence. It probably didn't do anything except irritate their pores and lighten their coin purses, but the idea was intoxicating. Imagine wearing moonlight on your cheeks. What better way to declare yourself unattainable? Historians still argue whether this fascination with lunar beauty was widespread or more confined to folklore-heavy regions and mystically inclined households. But even in the most rational courts, the symbolism was potent. Moon equals purity. Moon equals mystery. Moon equals a woman untouched by the grit of the earth, drifting in cycles of light and shadow. You run your hands over your arms, still slightly damp from rosewater rinses. You've avoided the sun for so long that your skin practically glows under moonlight. You fancy yourself a little lunar too, changing with the phases. Perfectly predictable, occasionally eclipsed. Your maid sets a candle near your bedside. Not too close, not too bright, just enough for your features to remain in soft focus. She gently places a pouch of dried herbs under your pillow, for better dreams and clearer skin. You nod. You do not ask what's in it. It's probably fine. Before you lie down, you glance at your reflection again. Just a flicker in the polished brass. You look otherworldly. That's the goal. Not human, not hardy, celestial. Because the closer you are to the moon, the further you are from the mundane, and no one writes poetry about a girl with dirt under her nails. You exhale slowly and pull the blanket to your chin. Outside, the night breathes in time with you, a gentle reminder. You are pale. You are delicate, and, for tonight at least, you are the moon. You wake to the muffled clatter of distant footsteps and the low groan of a turning wheel in the courtyard, likely a cart carrying fresh bread and yesterday's gossip. You rise slowly, like a relic being lifted from velvet, limbs stiff from stillness, but blessedly pale from the cool night air and the dried herbs under your pillow. The moon worked her magic. You're ready for another day of quietly orchestrated perfection. That is, until you remember, today is a smiling day, which means your teeth must also be presentable. Ah, teeth. The quiet betrayal of many a noble visage, because no matter how much white powder and lavender oil you apply, one glimpse of yellowed molars can undo the entire illusion. Unfortunately, medieval dentistry is creative at best. A cold historical truth. Tooth care in medieval Europe was rudimentary. Brushing existed, sort of, but it looked more like rubbing a rag over your teeth with salt, crushed herbs, or sometimes ashes. Mouthwash? Sure, if you count rinsing with vinegar or mint steeped in wine. But sugar had begun its sweet conquest, and with it came rot, abscesses, and the slow dissolution of even the daintiest smile. You sit at your dressing stool and allow your maid to hand you a linen square dusted with sage and charcoal. You dab it across your teeth, suppressing a wince. The texture is rough. The taste is smokier than you'd prefer. But it works. Mostly. At least it gives your breath the illusion of mint instead of mortality. Now your quirky tidbit of dental delight. Some nobles used honey and ground pearl as a tooth polish. Sweet, yes. Also wildly counterproductive, since the sugar probably invited more decay than it cured. Others rubbed crushed rosemary stems on their gums, or chewed licorice root to scent their breath. One Italian noblewoman even swore by rinsing with her own morning urines. But we don't talk about her. Historians still debate how widespread these dental rituals were. Were they part of daily grooming? Reserved for court appearances? Or simply optimistic attempts at damage control? One thing is certain. Medieval smiles were often closed-lipped for a reason. You lean in close to your polished brass mirror. The image warps slightly, but the essentials are visible. Your lips retinted with crushed elderberry. Your teeth passably clean. Slightly dulled, but nothing a coy handkerchief can't obscure. You smile gently, just enough to test the curve. A little more tilt, a little less tooth. That's better. Downstairs, there will be cider, and conversation, and at least one attempt at flirting from a minor noble with bad breath and worse intentions. You prepare. Not emotionally, overly. You chew a clove. It numbs your tongue. That's normal. Maybe. Who knows anymore? And here it is, the final layer of the illusion, the one they don't paint in portraits. You don't just smell like violets, move like silk, or sparkle like lead-dusted frost. You have to smile like none of it hurts, even when it absolutely does. The day unfolds in soft layers, fragrant parchment, lazy conversation, and subtle maneuvering disguised as compliments. You drift from parlor to garden terrace, each room a new stage, each glance a tiny performance. You tilt your head just so, nod at the right moments, and speak in a voice that barely rises above a breath. And today, you're not just a beauty, you're a weapon. Because beneath the powders, the perfume, and the painstakingly coiled braids, there lies the other art of noble womanhood, political theater. And in that performance, your appearance isn't a passive ornament. It's strategy, a cold, clear fact. Beauty, especially for queens and high-ranking noblewomen, often held political value far beyond marriage. A graceful appearance could win favor in court, silence enemies, and charm foreign dignitaries. It was a form of soft power. No armies required, just an unlined forehead and a conveniently timed swoon. Take Queen Isabeau of Bavaria, for example, whose beauty was considered so persuasive, her mere presence quelled factional unrest. Or Eleanor of Aquitaine, whose allure helped her navigate not one, but two royal marriages, and shaped the very narrative of courtly love. These women weren't just admired, they were listened to, because they were impossible to ignore. But here's your strange little stiletto in the silk slipper. Some queens went further, commissioning paintings and miniature portraits to be sent across kingdoms ahead of marriage negotiations. Think Tinder, but with a 2-month delivery time and no swiping, only scrutinizing. These portraits were heavily enhanced by artists to suit current beauty trends. Pale skin, elongated necks, narrowed eyes. If reality didn't cooperate, art politely lied. Historians still argue whether these portraits were viewed with genuine belief or political understanding. Did kings fall for the illusion, or did they simply accept the fantasy as part of the deal, knowing that beauty was just one part of the marriage contract, albeit the most visible one? Back in the solar, you practice your seating posture. One slipper, just visible. Hands folded. Gaze downward, then up, but never directly into someone's eyes. Two forward. You remember your lessons. A stare is a challenge. A glance is a gift. You hear murmurs down the corridor. A new envoy has arrived. young, unmarried, and, most importantly, impressionable. Your aunt adjusts your veil, and your cousin smooths her skirts like a cat preparing to pounce. It's not jealousy, not yet. It's politics. You glide toward the reception room, catching your reflection in a polished shield as you pass. You smile. Softly. Persuasively. Kind of smile that's been practiced 100 times but still looks effortless. The kind of smile that might charm a prince or bury a rival. Because beauty in your world isn't static. It moves. It adapts. It influences. And in the right hands, yours, for example, it can shape kingdoms. The envoy turned out to be neither handsome nor particularly clever. Just another boy cloaked in satin and self-importance, with cheeks too pink and a mustache that hasn't quite committed. Still, he bowed deeply, and that's what matters. Your smile, gentle as ever, had done its work. And yet, hours later, as you recline near the hearth, with your slippers off and your ankles wrapped in lavender-soaked cloths, your thoughts drift further east, not toward court gossip or local nobility, but foreign beauty. Because while your world is full of powdered cheeks and wilting elegance, other worlds tell different stories, and sometimes the stories slip through the silk curtains and stir something curious. A reliable historical fact. As trade expanded during the later Middle Ages, particularly along the Silk Road and via Mediterranean ports, contact with Eastern cultures, Byzantine, Persian, Moorish, Chinese-influenced European fashion and beauty, spices, oils, exotic pigments, and cosmetics filtered westward, wrapped in mystery and often misinterpretation. Suddenly, everyone wanted something foreign. The Italian courts imported perfumes and coal from the Middle East. Venetian ladies dyed their hair golden with saffron paste to emulate Greek goddesses. In France, noblewomen crushed cinnabar to rouge their lips in shades inspired by Moorish traditions. And in England, they just copied what the French were doing. Now, your favorite quirky morsel. Some noblewomen took to shaving the tops of their heads, yes, just the front hairline, to create a higher, more dramatic forehead. This idea, likely inspired by Byzantine and Eastern iconography, gave the illusion of intelligence and refinement. A big forehead wasn't just tolerated, it was desirable. You've seen portraits where women look like sentient eggs, and yet they were the era's it girls. Historians still debate how much of this trend hopping was sincere admiration versus exoticism-fueled curiosity. Some scholars suggest the obsession with Eastern beauty was as much about control as desire, a way of absorbing the other without fully understanding it. Others argue it was just fashion doing what fashion always does, spiraling into chaos. You sit straighter as your maid brushes your hair. What's left of it after your own forehead elevation? She applies rose-scented oil from Damascus, a recent gift from your uncle's trading contact. It smells richer than anything local. Heavier, luxurious in a way that makes even your simplest gesture feel like performance art. Your cousin walks in with a jeweled comb from Andalusia and a story about a Moorish princess who used crushed rubies on her lips. You both know that's probably not true, but oh, how lovely to imagine. This is what beauty does. It consumes and transforms. What begins as fascination becomes imitation, and what was once foreign becomes your new normal. You smooth your silk robe, imported from Florence, inspired by Chinese weaving patterns, stitched in England by hands you'll never meet. The world is in your wardrobe and on your face. And yet, as the fire crackles and your feet soak, you wonder if your beauty is built from 1,000 borrowed pieces, whose reflection is it really? The fire has burned low now and shadows dance lazily across your chamber walls. You watch them flicker and stretch, those long, fragile shapes cast by the curling iron stand, the draped veil, the lace hem hanging from the bedpost like a ghost left in mid-curtsy. There's comfort in the repetition of it all, the ritual, the routine, the relentless expectation. But lately, things have been shifting. The halls feel lighter somehow, and the music at court is changing. Faster, bolder, less about floating and more about moving. There's talk of Italy again. But this time, it's not just oils and pigments they want. It's ideas. Books are being copied with strange new faces, and women in portraits smiling with teeth. Actual teeth. Foreheads a little smaller. Hairlines drifting back down toward reality. Sunlight in the garden no longer whispers scandal. It beckons. The Renaissance, they say. A rebirth. But for whom? A historical fact that tightens your bodice slightly with anxiety. As the Renaissance spread through Europe, beauty standards evolved. Naturalism in art began to favor more lifelike depictions. A healthy glow replaced the deathly pallor. Rosier cheeks, slightly fuller bodies, a little less ghost, a little more goddess. And with that shift, some of the older ideals, extreme pallor, visible veins, starved silhouettes, began to fade. Of course, fashion never retreats entirely. Some nobles still clung to the classics. Long fingers, tiny feet, skin pale enough to make snow feel self-conscious. But the tide was turning. Mirrors were improving. So were paints. And suddenly, you didn't need to look like you were dying to be seen. Your odd tidbit to tuck under your pillow tonight. In some courts, artists began adding soft gold leaf to lips and eyelids in portraits. Not to signal otherworldliness, but radiance. Sunlight kissed, not sun-fearing. A bold, almost rebellious nod to vitality. Imagine that. Skin that says, I've lived, not, I've barely survived. Historians still argue whether the old beauty standards ever truly disappeared, or if they just morphed, went underground, resurfaced in subtler forms. After all, the desire to appear untouched, unattainable, and adored, that never really goes out of style. It just gets new packaging. You sit before your mirror again. Now polished glass, imported, sharper than the brass. It shows everything, every line, every freckle you weren't supposed to have. You stare. You reach for your powder. Pause. Then, quietly, you reach for the rose balm instead. It's pink. Alive. Fragrant. You dab it on your cheeks. And for the first time in years, you let the pink breathe. Just a little. Outside, your younger cousin runs across the courtyard barefoot, laughing like someone who hasn't yet learned the weight of the mirror. The wind lifts her hair. She doesn't notice. You smile, just barely. Maybe tomorrow you'll join her. Maybe. The manor is quiet tonight. Quieter than it has been in weeks. No feasts. No veiled glances. No secret smirks behind fans. Just the sound of distant crickets, the soft thump of your maid folding linens, and the slow, familiar creak of your dressing stool as you lower yourself for the final ritual of the day. Your feet are bare. Your corset hangs loosely over the back of a chair, the boning bending slightly from use. And your skin, dear, dedicated, resilient skin, is flushed naturally. No paste, no chalk, just the warmth of a bath still clinging to your collarbones. You've done it all. For years, every powder, every paste, every poisonous, pigeon-based, leech-flavored, moon-guided concoction imaginable. You've painted on veins, crushed beetles for blush, bathed in sour milk, and dieted on the suggestion of fruit. You've smiled through lead rot and dainty foot cramps like a warrior in silk armor. But now, just for tonight, you let it all go, and in the candlelight, you remember every version of beauty that's passed through these halls. Some faded, like perfume. Others still haunt portraits in the long gallery. Pale faces, high foreheads, pinched lips. They all look like you. Or maybe you have spent years trying to look like them. And suddenly, it all feels so fragile. Here's one last historical fact to cradle in your arms. As time marched toward the Renaissance and beyond, many of these extreme standards shifted or softened. The beauty never stopped being a performance. The tools changed. Powdered wigs, bustles, corsets of steel, facelifts hidden behind fans. But the expectations? They simply evolved. And your curious final tidbit? In some burials, nobles were interred wearing full cosmetics, their faces preserved in the afterlife as if still attending a banquet. Because beauty wasn't just for the living, it was legacy. An image to greet death in. Historians still debate whether this was a gesture of honor or simply another form of pressure. One last performance. Even after the curtain had fallen, you rise and pad softly to the window. The moon, your faithful companion, hangs fat and silver in the sky. You exhale, your breath fogging the cool pane, and reflection stares back at you. Pale, yes, but also awake. And beneath it all, there's a strange kind of peace. You are not an angel, not a painting, not a powdered illusion. You are a woman. And for the first time in a long while, that's enough. The chamber grows darker as the last candle gutters low, its flame shrinking to a flicker, then nothing. The night presses in softly now, velvet and slow. The world outside your window has quieted, and inside your bones, something ancient exhales. You sink onto your bed. The linen sheets cool and crisp beneath you, the weight of your own body unfamiliar after so many days of careful, curated poise. No corset binding your ribs, no heavy veil on your brow, no bells to answer, no mirrors to please, just breath and quiet, and the faint smell of lavender lingering on your sleeves. Your muscles ease, inch by inch. Your fingers uncurl from the posture of the day. Even your face, so often sculpted into calm perfection, begins to soften. There is no need to smile now, no need to look ethereal. Tonight, you are just here. Outside, the wind rustles through ivy leaves, carrying whispers of laughter and perfume, of embroidered slippers and painted lips, of all the lives lived beneath lace and powdered veils. Let them fade. Let the silence wrap around you like silk. Let your mind drift from pale feet and powdered cheeks to something quieter, something deeper. You are safe. You are safe. You are still. You are enough. End of script. Sweet dreams.